water. It is what made the world we live in, and all that is in it we cherish. But it may soon take everything from us.
The Arctic sea ice is at its lowest levels on record. In northern Siberia, it hit 100.4 degrees.
Catastrophic Category 4 hurricane bearing down the U.S.
We could be looking at a majority of the surrounding communities flooded with upwards of 9 to 20 feet of water.
Miami stands on the front line of climate change. But are we facing the worst in this global crisis? And what does the future hold for us? This is what we set out to answer.
They used to call me El Bigote, the mustache, because I had a big mustache. All right, I was 30 years old, 31 years old here, 30, 28, 29, somewhere in there. I used to be skinny then, and my hair was dark. My name is Captain Dan Kipnis. Everybody calls me Captain Dan. And the reason they do that is that I've been a boat captain most of my life. Growing up on Miami Beach, I grew up on an island, Palm Island, off the MacArthur Causeway, so it's water all around me, and I guess I ended up being a captain.
Captain Dan had sold his house in Miami Beach, where he'd lived for 15 years.
So why did I leave? I did not want to be involved in the crisis that South Florida is in right now, but that is going to greatly expand in the coming years and quickly.
Captain Dan is now an avid speaker and presenter on issues of climate change.
What got me going was a very simple thing. Global warming is the number one most important thing mankind has ever faced, ever. This could make us go extinct as a species. Not that the world will stop, because it will continue going. But mankind and many of the animals in the oceans and on land will cease to exist. They'll go extinct. As you know, barnacles only grow in water. Tide might go down, but the water has to come back up and cover that barnacle for it to be able to live. That's how it gets its food and its oxygen. I watched the barnacles on pilings over years and decades get higher and higher and higher. The only way that could happen is if the water's going up. People don't see it. If they saw it, you wouldn't see Brickell being built out like it has been. You would not see 36th Street from the Julia Tuttle Causeway south to downtown built out with those giant 50 and 60-story buildings. I just saw plans for a 1,100-foot building off of Biscayne Boulevard, 1,100 feet, right on the water. The mansions that are being built. Now, granted, this is not the first home of these people that are building these $30 million mansions on the water. Might be their third or fourth home. But you better be willing to throw away $30 or $40 million because of sea level rise. Just throw it away if you want to build right on the water at Miami Beach.
3% of Miami-Dade County is greater than 12 feet above sea level. We're really low. And so now if you go to Miami Beach, except for on the beach where there's a little hump of sand, most of that is less than 4 feet above sea level.
Dr. Harold Wanless is a geologist and climate scientist who has been working at the University of Miami for the past 50 years. In 2016, he was named one of the 50 people transforming American politics by Politico, alongside names like Bernie Sanders, Sonia Sotomayor, and Tim Cook.
The reality, though, about global warming or climate change is of all the extra heat that has been created by these extra greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, only about 2% of that heat has remained in the atmosphere. The rest, over 90%, is transferred to the ocean. The ocean has, as you know from high school physics, an immense ability to take in and hold heat, which is what it's doing. And so when you think about it, this global warming we have created is really a story about warming the ocean. And that problem with the warmed ocean is that the ocean warms, it expands, so it's driving sea level rise. And even more than that, the warmed ocean is now, since the 1990s, has been getting in around Greenland and Antarctica, and has initiated and is accelerating ice melt, ice on land that's being added to the ocean, also raising sea level. Much of Florida, all of Florida, is underlain by limestone. The limestone in southeast Florida and southwest Florida is very young, and it's very porous. And you can pour water in it. We can have a 12-inch rainstorm and the water will just disappear. And so one of the things you do if you're worried about flooding or rising sea level is you want to build levees and dikes around to keep the water out. The problem is we're so porous the water will just come right up and through. This is a reality check that you can't always just block off the sea. And everybody wants to build these walls that you live behind, but why would you want to live on Miami Beach if there was no beach?
I do think that on a day-to-day basis, living on the coast in South Florida is not dangerous. It's delirious. It's stupid, okay, that we're not making plans to help all the people who can't move. Now, we can live there as long as you can get away with it. Raise walls, raise streets, and all that for the wealthy people. But the poor people can't do that. Nobody has said a word of where you're going to move 2.5 million poor people that work 2 jobs or 3 jobs to live and live 2 or 3 families in an apartment.
In Miami, lower-income communities are facing a two-pronged assault from the climate crisis.
This is Miami-Dade County today, and the brown colors are the very high areas that are up above 10 feet above sea level. And most of this is 12 or 14 at very best. And you can see they're narrow areas that aren't near the coast, so they were commonly, especially up here, developed by lower income areas, Little Haiti and so on.
Where used to be considered as undesirable lands by mostly white developers has now become a hotspot of developments, the destination of a climate exodus.
They fenced it up because they want control of this. They're gonna cut all these trees down and build all this stuff up and up and up and up and up. If y'all come through next month when it's raining, you will see how much flooding it is back there.
Michael Clarkson is a community activist based in Little Haiti.
We're facing the invasion of people who don't live here, but now they coming because what? This is safe ground. But this is the same ground that y'all restricted people to, the Bahamians, because the original name of this area was Lemon City, settled by Caribbean people, right? But those Caribbean people, they long gone. They long gone. And the Haitians came here, they fought for this little spot, and nobody's speaking for them. That's the reason why I'm speaking. I'm speaking because I've seen this stuff all my life.
In the high ground area, Liberty City and Little Haiti, they were very frustrated with developers knocking on their doors. And so the story started coming out back in 2014, 2015, that they were calling it climate gentrification, the locals, in Little Haiti and Liberty City, and they were saying, I didn't even know there was a lien on my house. The developers are looking at the public record, seeing which homeowner was most vulnerable, behind on their taxes or have a lien on their house, and offering them money to buy their house outright.
And I suppose that's a shame, but they're not buying much time by doing that. It's sort of a silly decision because, think about it, all these lower areas, they're part of our city that we need to function. And we need the little roads around that go up and down. And by the time we're at 6 feet, we're not going to be a functional city, even though there's that little bit of land toward the coast that people are moving things to. Some people are and buying on. And so I think it's all going to be lost.
These guys right here, Magic City Development Corporation, they don't give a damn about this community. They don't. All they want to do is come in and make some money. I think it's something like 22 bars. They're going to put a bunch of bars in there. People in this community can go to them bars. They can't even afford to live in some of this shit they're getting ready to do.
The Clio Institute is a nonprofit that I founded in 2010 to help the community understand the urgency of the climate science and the importance of acting early so that the most vulnerable communities are protected from the worst impacts. So we found that our work wasn't stopping gentrification, but just making the homeowners more informed. So that if somebody offers you $200,000 for your house, because the tax record says it's worth $150,000, it might actually be worth a lot more than that on the market, so that they could be informed sellers. And if they wanted to sell, they could sell for the right price. And if they didn't want to sell, they could hold on to it. So the idea of making sure everybody has the information to act in their own best interest.
The Miami metropolitan area is home to more than 6 million people, some of the most vulnerable Americans to climate change. But Miami is far from the only place in the world facing the climate crisis right now.
I was very lucky that I had a house that was worth over $1 million. I'm on the upper end, I'm in the 1%. Ours, we got more money here in the United States. We probably can push it off farther and farther and farther down the road. But in many, many countries, look, if I lived in the Delta in Bangladesh, I would, where am I going? All right, there's no place to go. They're already in the water.
The Ganges Delta region has a population of more than 100 million, being one of the densest regions on Earth. The average elevation here is less than 16 feet. A large part of the region is covered by the Sundarbans, the world's largest mangrove forest.
I am from the state of West Bengal in India, and I was born in not too far from the Sundarbans, where I spent some of my childhood years. That's where my family's village used to be.
Dr. Aditi Mukherjee is a researcher with the International Water Management Institute. She contributed to the 6th assessment report by the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change.
So this particular region is a low-lying coastal region. So apart from these high-intensive rainfall, what we are also finding in these low-lying coastal areas is rising sea level. And with that also storm surges. We are finding that some of these cyclones, like tropical cyclones, are either getting more frequent or are becoming more intense with global warming, partly because the sea surface temperature are getting warmer. So these cyclones are picking up a lot more energy and they are becoming much more devastating. You have to also remember that traditionally, these regions have always been vulnerable, even before climate change became as apparent as it is now. And that's because of its remote locations, poor socioeconomic indicators. And now on top of that, you have climate change related hazards. So you have really a huge amount of climate related risks that the people of the Sundarbans, both in Bangladesh as well as in West Bengal, actually face. And one of the major climate-related hazards has been floods. Floods are coming from both intense rainfall, but also intense storm events and coastal surges that comes because of partly sea level rise, but also very intense storm events.
For how many years you have been facing this problem?
26 বছর হলো।
How long does a flood last?
6 মাসে থাকে, 8 মাসে থাকে, 9 মাসে থাকে। 3 বছর ধরে থাকি, পানি ওঠে, পানি খুব করে আমরা অসহায় হয়ে যাই। এই টাকা দিয়ে জায়গা ভাড়া নিয়ে আবার পানির সময় অন্য জায়গায় এক্সট্রা করে ভাড়া দিতে হয়, তার জন্য আমরা খুব দুঃখিত আমরা খুব অকুলানো হয়ে গেছে আমরা থাকতে পারতেছি না ঢেউ ঢেউ এসে বেড়া মেরা সব নষ্ট হয়ে যায় কত থালি বাটি গরু ছাগল হাঁস মুরগি অনেকটি ভাইসাও যায় কতটি তোলা যায় কতটি হারা যায় ক্ষতি তো মনে করেন যে কিছুই পাইলে পারি না যা পালি সব মনে করেন যে হাঁস মুরগি ছাগল গরু এনে সব মনে করেন যে ক্ষতি হয়ে যায় এমনও টাইমে পানি আসে জন্য তোলার মনে করেন যে উপরে যে টান তুলমি হয়ে যোগ হয় না ভাই সেই জায়গা পানি সংসারে থালাবাসি শুদ্ধে ভেসে যায় খেতাবালি শুদ্ধে ভেসে যায় এমন পরিস্থিতি দ্বারা কয়সুম
মানে এরকম চিন্তা ভাবনা বলতে আপনার যত আমাদের নৌকা তো ব্যবহার করা লাগে নৌকা আছে ভুড়া আছে ওটা আপনার যে পরিমাণে আমার ঘরে পানি ওঠা না পর্যন্ত মানে আমরা করি না আর তারপরে চলাচল বন্ধ হয়ে যায় যাতায়াত কষ্ট হয় অনেকে নৌকা কিনতে পারে না যার কারণে তারা মানে অল্পতে পানিতেই তারা অন্য এলাকায় চলে যায়
কোথায় চলে যায়
অনেকে আছে আপনার শ্বশুর বাড়িতে যায় বা কোনো আত্মীয় স্বজনের বাড়িতে যায় বেশিরভাগ হচ্ছে আপনার রাস্তায় বাড়ি করে হ্যাঁ রাস্তায় নতুন ঘর মেরামত করে হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ
কুরবানিতে উজারিদের পরে ভাড়া দেন 5,000 করে আবার ভাড়া থাকা নাকবো সেখানে ওই মনে করেন যে জায়গা উৎকান হইতেছে ছেলে ফেলে করে এখন কত যোগাবার ভারি কসম যোগাবানি ভারি না কসম দিবারি ভারি না ফেরার নিয়ে আর মনে করেন যে আন কি কম আমরা তো পরিস্থিতি করতে আইছি আন ফাঁকা অঞ্চলে আবার ভাড়া জানাইবো পানি আসলে
One of the major adaptation options by a large majority of the people has been migrations. Almost every family has migrants. Some of them, very few of them are able to take safe routes, but many of them also fall victims to human trafficking and lot of those issues.
With rising tides behind them and a treacherous journey ahead, many are instead deciding to make a stand, to fight climate change and defend their homes. Organizations like the Friendship NGO have been working closely with local communities to plant and restore mangroves in the Sundarbans.
So restoring the mangroves is one of those nature-based solutions which mangroves literally slow down the impact of, buffer the impact of very extreme storms.
The people from this community took part for mangrove plantation. And this plantation will act as a natural barrier for their safety from storm surge, tidal surge, erosion, and any other crisis due to cyclone.
However, climate change is also killing the mangroves themselves.
The mangroves are also at risk because of higher sea levels and also higher salinity levels.
The crisis is only half of the world's original mangroves remains. The way it continues indicates mangroves will disappear within next 100 years.
We have to remember that the people in Sundarbans are not the ones who are actually responsible for climate change. Climate change, the main reason for climate change is carbon emissions because of unsustainably high levels of consumption. And these are the people whose carbon footprint is nearly zero or could be even negative for that matter. But they are bearing the main brunt of climate change, and whatever adaptation they do or whatever adaptation we as scientists say works, there is a limit to that because the warmer the globe gets, the less effective those adaptation measures becomes.
It is so difficult to turn a blind eye to a tragedy unfolding before our own eyes, a valiant yet futile fight against the rising tides.
So in some ways, solution to Sundarbans really is a global responsibility of how well especially the high-emitting nations, the rich nations, the global north, are able to reduce their emissions by, among other things, by reducing the amount of consumption that is very apparent in rich societies.
Can we learn to live with climate change? From what we have seen and heard so far, the answer seems to be clear. The only way we can fight for our future is to fight climate change itself. So what are we doing now?
We're going backwards so fast. We're not going forwards to fix something that the IPCC of the United Nations, their panel on climate change, just a few weeks ago said, we're done. We haven't acted fast enough. We have to stop now, right now. There is no down the road. Well, how much more dramatic do you need to get people's attention?
Today, more and more Americans are starting to accept the scientific consensus on climate change. Research shows that 72% of American adults think that global warming is happening. However, when it comes to whether they will personally be harmed, the number drops sharply to 47%. But why? Perhaps climate injustice has also made the acute pains of climate change feel distant to many of us.
There would be impacts on food security because there's a limit beyond which if the temperatures go, then all the crops' productivity comes down. We have already seen in the last 50 years slowdown in crop production, slowdown in increase in rate of productivity due to climate change. The point is that the climate crisis is literally not sparing anyone. Everybody will be affected one way or the other. And even those, traditionally, perhaps if people thought that the current level of wealth would insulate them to some extent, and yes, wealth does insulate, the example of Miami that we were giving, but only to a certain extent. We have been reading about, these devastating floods that happened in Germany, the kind of wildfires we are seeing in California. And so vulnerabilities everywhere. The degree of it may differ, but if your house burns down, whether you are in Bangladesh or in California, it's still a house that burned down. I mean, obviously a house in California would have been insured, so there would have been, lesser losses. But it's still scary that that's the future that we are putting our young people into. So what I want to say is that there is no option but to reduce emissions. Not reducing emissions is just simply not an option.
Forget the floods, forget the rains, the rivers of water that are coming across, the extra rain that we get in some places and not enough in others, stronger hurricanes, losing of crops, more insects, migration of species. Humanity as a whole, aren't we supposed to be the top of the pyramid, the smartest? We've evolved into something, if you believe in God, where He has made us special. And if you believe this, as so many people do, how can we allow this to happen?
We've had Syria and Yemen sort of collapse because of drought. That's what triggered their collapse of their countries. And then people can't grow things, so they move to the city and it all falls apart. And we've watched a vast number of people trying to emigrate from those countries elsewhere. All the other countries are healthy. We're not overwhelmed, and nobody wants them. I think one of the things I asked my students to read is about the Dust Bowl era in the 30s and in Oklahoma and Texas Panhandle area, where everything that was sort of going along with agriculture and a few dry years, and they hadn't done things right and it all went horrible. And so they tried to migrate to somewhere like California, and nobody wanted them. And that was just within this country. You'd think, oh, somebody will take them in. No, nobody really wanted them. It was very tough. And so we have now coming up where everybody living on the barrier islands sometime this century is going to be moving off. We have places like Phoenix that was 115 degrees for 2 weeks last summer. It's getting too hot. We have areas that have terrible fires that are going to be repeated fires until there's nothing to burn. People are going to be leaving there, and we're all going to be moving somewhere, either because of one of these climate effects. And where are we going to move? Well, they may not want us in Georgia or anywhere. They may not want us. We don't know. We're coming. We'll be coming. We'll make it happen, but it may be not very friendly. I don't know. It is sort of heartening to watch the Ukraine thing when people are eagerly, if they can, taking in children that are orphans now and doing things just out of compassion. But that's a little different than the climate change thing. So it's gonna be ugly, and it's gonna be catastrophic.
We are the ones who are marked for extinction. And if we don't begin to understand that we're fighting for us,
The irony of the climate crisis created by humans is that it will ultimately be felt as a human crisis. A disaster fueled by our own consumption, excess, short-sightedness, and compounded by our societal sins of rampant inequality. A crisis created by all of us, to be felt by all of us, and can only be solved by all of us together. There is nowhere to run from it. The time to act is now.
For 15 years or more now, I have been trying to educate people so they understand the reality of global warming, climate change, sea level rise, and so on, well enough that they can communicate it to others. So, and I think that is sort of everyone's responsibility. This is so serious. And if you don't think it's serious now, well, wait a decade and you're going to wish you'd gotten involved and wish we'd done something.
So I would say, at the very least, use your voice. Study the climate science. Have conversations with your friends, your family. Explain the urgency to them. Make everybody connect their voting to climate.
I think the most important climate change action that one can take, and that's across global north, global south, is vote with a lot of thinking. Like, who are we voting for? Is the party that I'm voting for takes climate change seriously? Will they do enough to mitigate climate change, and would they secure my children's futures?
It's time to leave the fossil fuel era. We didn't leave the Stone Age because we ran out of stones. We should leave this because there's a better way to do it, and what we're doing is going to be havoc. People used to think, oh, my grandchildren. No, your grandchildren will be terribly affected. Your children will be affected, and you will be affected.
The past few years have acutely reminded us of how intertwined our fates as humans have become. As long as one of us is under the threat of climate change, no one will truly be safe and sound. There is no time left for denial, cynicism, or to become despairing and numb. Because when people around the world come together, there is no challenge we cannot overcome.